with the car inventory, a lot of that too is also the chip shortage.
Yes. Yeah.
Because as we talked in one of the podcasts prior, a car nowadays, a new car is basically a walking or a mobile computer.
Mm-hmm.
And so and even not that you've got the car companies, but even like I was reading an article on Apple. Apple has shifted to essentially making most of their chips right now, that they do it themselves. And even Apple, who makes their own chips, was having trouble getting the pieces and parts that go together to make those chips. So even they were having some supply chain issues.
So have they started like manufacturing the chips? Because I know that they design their own chips, like the M1, is that what it's called? That was like a big deal when they came out with that because it was designed in-house. But are they now manufacturing the chips themselves?
I could be wrong on this. I believe they are.
That's crazy. Because one of my, I want to talk about the chip shortage too, and I had written down that Taiwan Semiconductor manufactured their chips, but I guess now they don't, so that's wrong.
Well, I think Taiwan Semiconductor is still a good play for that. I think,
Yeah.
I mean, semiconductors and chips right now. I mean, you and I both like Nvidia, AMC. Right. I mean, these are
AMD.
AMD.
Yeah.
No, not AMC.
Not AMC. Yeah.
We both like AMD. We both like Nvidia. I think those are a company that you could buy, and just for the foreseeable future, I mean, just know that they're in high demand. Their products are in high demand.
It's like it's a double-edged sword with Nvidia because they just had, I mean, go figure, another blowout quarter, and then they have been on a tear, like 3% a day for the past couple of days. Well, we're recording on Sunday now, but like Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, it was up like 3% per day, and like it's almost like, what do you do? Do you buy it like when at record highs, or do you wait for a correction? You know, I mean, at the position that I'm in, it's like I've accumulated like quite a few shares, so it doesn't really matter at this point. Like my cost basis isn't, or the average price isn't really moved by depending on where I buy it, unless I drop like a couple $1,000 in it. So
you and I were talking last week, and there were two stocks that you brought up that you said you sold, and you kind of kicked yourself for selling. What were those two stocks? Do you remember?
Uber and Moderna. Moderna was the other one.
Yeah. So and I think we're both kind of at this point. I would try to think about the last time I sold a stock in my personal portfolio, and I can't remember when that was. So for me personally, for the most part, I buy a company and I plan to hold them for life, unless something changes in the thesis for owning it.
Right.
And then I would sell it at that point in time. But so getting back to your, AMD, is now a good time to buy it or not? For me, I wouldn't be concerned about that because I would plan on holding it for decades.
AMD, I think, is actually a good buy right now because it's been flat. Like it's in the same circumstances they make. It's pretty comparable to Nvidia, and they've been flat for quite a bit now. Ever since I started buying it, it's been pretty flat. So I don't know what it's trading at right now valuation wise, but I would imagine it's probably a pretty good buy before earnings. Again, I don't know when they report earnings either.
I found it funny you mentioned Uber, that a lot of businesses out there are having problems with their labor force, trying to find workers. Mm-hmm. And the article stated that Uber was having the same problem. Uber's having a hard time finding drivers to drive. And
that's
so,
interesting, yeah.
Yeah, it doesn't escape a company like Uber as well.
So, sorry, go ahead.
I would say truck drivers are another. Trucking companies are having a hard time finding truckers to drive the stuff. So all this, when you look at this from a big picture, you've got bottlenecks, you've got labor issues, and with that, as we've talked about in the past couple of episodes, we've got inflation, right? We've got the cost of everything going up. An economist, or the old adage is, if you look out the window to your shop, and if there's too long of a line, that might mean that your prices are too cheap.
Right.
And so some of these companies have taken advantage of that with the demand for all their product by raising their prices. We've seen that with timber. We've seen that with gasoline, chicken wings, all down the line. So as an investor, is there places we could go, or how do we make that play?
So like long-term shortages are actually paradoxical in economics because, like you said, any sort of shortage in the short term should be corrected by a raise in price, and it's actually the same for labor shortages. So you'll hear a lot of times, especially now, like this wave of inflation is transitory, meaning it's not here for the long term, because they expect. I guess that their reasoning is that a lot of this inflation is being driven by these shortages, and once these shortages are corrected, then inflation will kind of taper off. But I mean, that doesn't account for like the demand push inflation that's being driven by all the stimulus and everything. So, I mean, in my opinion, I think it's a little bit of both. But I mean, I guess you can't really, without doing like a huge macroeconomic study that would probably take thousands of dollars to run.
Mm-hmm.
You can't really assign blame to whether it's the shortages or the stimulus. It's only time will tell. So, but to answer your question about how to invest for it, I do think one of the best ways remains to invest in chip makers. That's one that I had because even with shortages, it's likely that, like with the shortages, it's likely that you'll see some legislation to spur on manufacturing here in the United States, as opposed to, I had a number, 43 of global semiconductor production comes from Taiwan and South Korea. And then just like we saw with the PPE, the personal protective equipment for COVID, all of that stuff was made in China. And that was a real problem here in the United States. So we jacked up production of all that stuff here domestically. And I imagine something similar is going to happen for the semiconductors, because they become so essential to literally every business, and there's been huge macroeconomic consequences from the fact that we don't make them here. So I imagine that there's going to be a big push. Well, if the government, or if the federal government has their head screwed on correctly, this is a problem that needs to be addressed, and I feel like they will.